The urge to create is basic. So for Hopkins, finally being allowed to be a poet again was extremely important. I'm going to, two of my favorite little jokes, and I'll combine them into one. So the teacher is having the children at catechism class draw pictures from the Bible. And there's a little girl who's sitting and just ferociously with her crayons, drawing like crazy. And teacher goes over and says, "Susie, what are you drawing?" Susie, still drawing, looks up and says, "I'm drawing God." And the teacher says, "But Susie, no one knows what God looks like." And she says, "They will in a minute." Same teacher wanders over and says, "Johnny, what are you drawing?" And he's done. He holds up his picture of a large airplane with 4 people in it. And she says, "Well, that's very nice, Johnny. What Bible story is that?" And he says, "That's the flight into Egypt. And that's Joseph and Mary and the baby Jesus." And the teacher says, "Oh, that's very nice. Now, who's that 4th figure in there?" And he says, "That's Pontius the Pilate." Anyway, so that's enough of that. Let's look at the Windhover. It's the first one on your sheet. When Hopkins wrote this in 1877, he was in constant contact with his friend Bridges, who again was as good friends can be. They could be honest with each other. Bridges would criticize his poetry. Hopkins would defend it. Bridges would send his poems to Hopkins, and Hopkins would dismiss some of them as just uninteresting and old stuff. But the friendship remains solid right to the end. In fact, the very last poem that Hopkins ever wrote, and I actually won't be reading it today. It's not that hard, but it's so personal. I haven't quite gotten to the heart of it yet. But the last poem he ever wrote was called "To Robert Bridges," and it's a poem to his friend. So if you're interested, you can look it up. You won't have trouble reading it, but it's mysterious. It's Hopkins' own defense of himself in some last words to the man who was his dearest friend. Very interesting. It's just called "To Robert Bridges." In any way, when he wrote this poem in 1877, it was, he said to Bridges when he sent it, he thought it was the best thing he'd ever done up to that point, and was very pleased with it. Let me read through it, and then we can talk through it. The Windhover, and it's dedicated to Christ our Lord. "I caught this morning morning's minion, kingdom of daylight's dauphin, dappled dawn-drawn falcon, in his riding of the rolling level underneath him steady air, and striding high there how he rung upon the rein of a wimpling wing in his ecstasy, then off forth on a swing, as a skate's heel sweeps smooth on a bow bend, the hurl and gliding rebuffed the big wind, my heart in hiding stirred for a bird, the achieve of, the mastery of the thing. Brute beauty and valor and act, oh, air, pride, plume, here buckle, and the fire that breaks from thee then, a billion times told lovelier, more dangerous, O my chevalier. No wonder of it, sheer plod makes plough down Sicilian shine, and blue bleak embers, ah, my dear, fall, gall themselves, and gash gold vermilion. It's a beautiful but puzzling little poem. First part is fairly clear, and it's an actual incident. He went out one morning and saw a kestrel, a small falcon, and the kestrel apparently, I'm not sufficiently up in my bird knowledge, apparently can hover in the air for a while. seem almost stationary without movement, and then suddenly make these grand moves, and he witnessed that. So, and he's out in the morning, and that bird apparently often would fly early in the morning, so he'd seen it before. So it's the minion of the morning, announcing that morning was there. The young prince, if you will, of daylight, making his first appearance. So we've got something youthful as well. It's the young prince, the dauphin. Dapple dawn the dawn is coming up, and the falcon is drawn to the dapple of dawn, the multicoloring of the sun rising. Dapple dawn drawn falcon. In his riding of the rolling level underneath him steady air. Notice it's wonderful. You get rolling level underneath him steady. That's all one long adjective describing the air. So that he is hovering there, and underneath him, the air is rolling, it's level, it's below him, it's steady, and he is riding on top of it. And striding high there, how he rung upon the rein of a wimpling wing. Suddenly there's the turn. The wings go out, and he turns in his ecstasy, the joy of the bird that's making this sudden turn. Then off forth on a wing, and he does a big swing around, and Hopkins compares it to the beauty of an ice skater making a figure eight. The hurl and gliding, okay, and the smoothness of that bird turning, and rebuffing the big wind. The wind may be magnificent and holding him up, but the bird is showing he's even greater than the wind itself. My heart in hiding stirred for a bird. The bird didn't know he was there. His fellow Jesuits probably didn't know he was there looking at the bird. And many of his thoughts he himself would keep hidden. So my heart in hiding stirred, looking at this magnificent creature that God has created, the achieve of, the mastery of the thing. The mastery of the created bird, but also the mastery of what the bird can do in its flight. And it stirs the heart of the poet. Then it gets mysterious. Brute beauty. It's an animal beauty. God created it. There is beauty in it, but it's not man. It's not the highest achievement. There's something of the brute still in the falcon. And valor and act. The daring of the bird, the action of the bird. Oh, air, pride, plume, hair buckle, all sorts of things seem to come together the way something is buckled together. Or, alternate reading, or all of a sudden, the brute beauty, the valor, the act, the air, the pride, the plume, here buckle under. Those things don't seem to matter anymore. In our sense of if something is buckled under, it's brought down. Now, we don't know. This is the beauty of poetry, the mystery of poetry. Is the poet somehow, does he feel brought down because of the magnificence of the bird? Or is he saying the bird and that magnificent vision is brought down because of the fire that breaks from thee then? Well, who is the thee? Is it the bird? Is it Hopkins' hidden heart? Or he's coming to the point of mentioning, oh, my chevalier. If the dauphin is young royalty, the chevalier is the knight, is the one who rides out, who has attained his glory. And for Hopkins, there's only one person that could be, and that would be Christ. So it may be that seeing the bird buckles, Hopkins the poet buckles in the face of the fire that breaks from thee then, the fire of the glory of Christ, 1,000,000,000 times told lovelier, more dangerous. To understand Christ, to glory in what Christ did, can be more dangerous than just the bird in flight. If you truly understand what Christ represents, oh my chevalier. So we don't know. Or it's the beauty of poetry, it can mean all those things simultaneously. In prose, you'd have to specify. But part of the beauty of poetry is pulling different ideas together and coalescing them, or if you will, buckling them up in one thought. And he does that. And then we get this. which suggests to me what he's talking about is Christ. No wonder of it. Sheer plod makes plow down silly and shine. The simple day-to-day work of human existence, or the simple flight of the bird, if it's done repeatedly over and over again, in the same way that the farmer is plowing the field over and over again with the same plow, going down the same furrow over and over again, the plow begins to shine. The more work it does, the more worn down it is, it gets a shine to it. That isn't the shining of something new, but the shining of that which has been used so much. And the notion of taking up the plow, doing the work, could also suggest the notion of Christ becoming human, walking among us, God himself in simplicity, walking, teaching, loving, being charitable, and now shines greater than anything else in the world. And blue bleak embers. Okay, we shift to a very different image. The fire is nearly out. Those embers are still in the grate. They are indeed blue bleak embers. There may be a little blue in them. They're going to head gray. Ah, my dear. It's a phrase taken from a poem by English poet, religious poet George Herbert, in a poem called Love. And he slips it in there. Those embers fall. When the embers fall out of the grate to below the grate on the fireplace floor, they fall, they gall themselves. They suddenly split open. And where you thought the fire was dead, it's beautiful, gash gold vermilion. Suddenly, the fire's not dead. There's gold in it. There's beauty in it. There's the last moment of flame and fire in what you thought was a dead ember. And what have we got again? The notion of that which seemed dead actually not only has life in it, but glows more beautifully when we thought it was dead, and suddenly it has moved onward. It's still alive, it's still glowing. In fact, it's gashed, and it seems, again, a possible reference to our Lord and the sacrifice of the cross. But what happens as a result? Gold vermilion, the most beautiful thing in the world, suddenly being there, so that the death wasn't the end. Hence the dedication to Christ our Lord. Personally, I suspect it's a poem dedicated to Christ, in honor of Christ, in love of Christ. But it's a wonderful, mysterious combination of words and images and nature, and he was a master at that point, absolute master. Now, that love of nature takes us to one other thing. He went back to Oxford for a few years, from 1877 to 1879, and was working in the area, very different from the life he had imagined when he was a student there. He was still working for the Jesuits, so it was a very small group of people he was associated with, and not hugely honored by Oxford itself, but he was there doing the work. And he had read the medieval theologian Duns Scotus, who had also been at Oxford for a few years. Scotus's great moment was he went to Paris and defended, apparently brilliantly, the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception when it was being debated in Paris, long before it became a doctrine of the faith. So out of Hopkins' love of Mary, he had that connection with Scotus, but there was one other little thing, and that was an idea in Duns Scotus' writing that Hopkins picked up on. My Latins, I have no Latin. I had an American education, which means I know nothing. Hexietas, H-A-E-C-C-E-I-T-A-S. Not sure how it would be pronounced.
H-A-E-C?
H-A-E-C. Hake, C-E-I,
C-E-I,
T-A-S. Hake.
C-E-I-T-A-S.
Yeah.
H-A-T-A-S. Yeah.
Okay.
H-A-T-A-S. Thisness.
Thisness. That's it, yes. The translation that I found was thisness. And it goes back to what I said earlier, what he found in nature. Everything, even though it's part of the universal gift of God and design of God, has a uniqueness, a thisness, that is its particular self. And as in nature, and this is Hopkins' line, word, it's a little indistinct, it has its in-stress, that is the pattern underneath it that God provided, so when we look at the individual item, we get a sense of God's design. But our job then is to take that in, what he called inscape, and we have to absorb what we see out there, and then we have to contemplate it and discover the pattern for ourselves. So in-stress is out there, we inscape it and then study and try to figure out the pattern out there and what is going inside us. And what he took from Scotus was every single thing is unique, absolutely unique. And then he extends it, and I'm just in love with this poem now. It's I memorized it. I don't know if I can do it. I'll give it a try. Extends it to each individual human creature created by God. Okay? As kingfishers catch fire, dragonflies draw flame. As tumbled over rim in roundy wells, stones ring, like each tucked string tells. Each hung bell's bow swung finds tongue to fling out broad its name. Each mortal thing does one thing and the same, deals out that being that inside each one dwells, selves, goes itself, myself, it speaks and spells, crying, what I do is me, for that I came. I say more, the just man justices, keeps grace, that keeps all his goings graces, acts in God's eye what in God's eye he is, Christ. For Christ plays in 10,000 places, lovely in limb and lovely in eyes not his, to the Father, through the figures of men's faces. It's a beautiful poem. Oh, it's a beautiful poem. Let me start at the beginning. We begin with nature again. We begin with the bird, the kingfisher. As kingfishers catch fire, the kingfisher for a long time had been used as an image of Christ in painting, in earlier poetry. Part of it, I think, is two things. One, the king, and also fisher, the fisher of men. And the bird would fly from above and suddenly fly down very quickly, catch a fish, and come up with it again. So the image Hopkins uses is the bird, the kingfisher, is suddenly flying down, and as it spreads its wing in descent, it catches the rays of the sun. Okay? So as kingfishers catch fire, that is, manage to get on their descending wings the light of the sun. And of course what we have is the Creator, the Son, the descent of God, of one of God's creatures, the kingfisher, perhaps Christ himself, going down and catching the fish. Dragonflies draw flame. The tiny, those little insects that hover above the surface of the water. They're small, they're insignificant, they don't have the glory of the kingfisher, but even they, as they're flying along with those thin little transparent wings, are catching some of the same sunlight and drawing the flame down to them as well, meaning even the little things in God's creation reflect the glory of the sun and have their little part to play and catch some of what's coming down from above. Point being, the kingfisher has a thisness. The dragonfly, lesser creature though it is, has a thisness, its own reason for being. Then, it's wonderful. Roundy wells. You're at a round well, you take a stone, you tumble it over the rim of the well, and as it hits bottom, it rings out. And it means a tumbled stone going down a well has a sound to give out that is peculiar to that particular stone. And as you probably know, if you drop different stones of different sizes, you get different sounds. Like each tucked string tells. Tucked is an old word for plucked. So every time you pluck a string, it tells, it makes a sound. But depending on which string you're plucking, you're getting a different sound, because the sound dwells in that specific string. Each hung bell's bow swung finds tongue. One of those big giant bells. You swing it, the tongue of the bell hits it, and the sound flings out broad the name of that particular bell. Each hung bell's bow swung finds tongue. By the way, notice the wonderful rhymes. Hung, swung, tongue, and then we get fling, where what vowels changes. Each hung bell's bow swung finds tongue to fling out broad its name. Each mortal thing does one thing and the same. Each one of us who lives has one thing we were created for, and we tend to do it over and over again. Deals out that being indoors each one dwells. Each one of us has in our created being something we were created for, something we were created to do. Selves, goes itself. Myself, it speaks and spells. Whatever we do, there's this assertion of this is crying. What I do is me, for that I came. Particular purpose for each human life. By the way, this just occurs to me. Evelyn Waugh's favorite novel, he thought his greatest novel was Helena, his fictionalized life of St. Helena. One of the major themes of that novel is that God created Helena for one particular reason, and that was to go find the true cross. And he makes the assertion that in the novel that God has created each one of us for one particular purpose. And that what we need to do is cooperate with God's will and the purpose he made us in order to do that one thing we were supposed to do. And in the novel, all the way through, you can see Waugh weaves in the pattern. She is to go and find the true cross in Jerusalem. And she does it. She's hard-headed, she's practical. She is asking questions of phony religion. She's coming to realize there's a truth out there. And then, having done that, off she goes and indeed does what she was supposed to do. That's the point here in the Hopkins poem. Selves, goes itself. Myself it speaks and spells, crying, what I do is me, for that I came. I say more. I find this interesting. One reason Hopkins came was to be a poet and say more. So he's doing here what he's talking about and claiming, I say more. Okay, I've got more to say. The just man, justices. God creates just men, so they will hand out justice. Keeps grace. The really just man cooperates with God's grace that God has given him. That keeps all his goings graces. Now, he does other things than just justice, but because he's keeping grace, then he's able to do other things as well. Acts in God's eye what in God's eye he is, Christ. It is the life principle in every single human being, and when we do what we are supposed to do, we are acting out the Christ in us as God sent his Son on a mission to earth to do certain things. Christ had to come and sacrifice himself for us, and he did it. So again, we get that connection. For Christ plays in 10,000 places, lovely in limbs and lovely in eyes not his, to the Father, through the features of men's faces. So every time you, in your being, do what God created you to do, you are doing it, playing out the Christ in you for the Father, to his glory. I just find it a lovely poem. Just a lovely poem. But again, we begin with nature. We begin with nature, and it moves onward. After the stint in Oxford, which was from 1877 to 1879, and by the way, it was Scotus in a way that scuttled Hopkins' career in the Jesuits. When he took his exams to see where he would go next, he was so on fire, having just read Scotus, that apparently the Jesuit fathers were a little suspicious of him and thought it was a little strange. And so instead of giving him the scholarly career he might have had, they kept him as a parish priest and someone doing, I guess you could call it academic grunt work, teaching grammar, grading essays, just very simple things, which he did, although it would come to be a problem later in his life. But he was never comfortable giving sermons. He would write them out, didn't think he was good at it. Because of his odd little, being a tiny man with a high-pitched voice, and he couldn't really present himself the way he wished he could. But he was very devout and apparently a good pastor. But he was then sent to a little place, maybe you know where it is, called Bedford-Lee. I don't know, I couldn't even find it on a map. I'm not sure where in England it is. Working class community, and he was only there for a few months, but it was the happiest time in his life as a parish priest, because the people were so happy to have a priest among them. Apparently there hadn't been one around for a while, that they needed him, they were happy to have him, they were devoted to him, and it was at that moment his pastoral life came to its highest point. And he was very content there. But then he was moved almost immediately and sent to Liverpool. And as he wrote, he was horrified by the poverty, misery, and moral degradation he found in Liverpool. He had not seen anything like it, and became more and more convinced of the fallen nature of man and the terrible conditions that so many people lived in. But he was there for 1879, 1880, doing his work, still doing what he was doing. But it's interesting that under those difficult conditions, he wrote a few of his very greatest poems, including the next one on your sheet, that was written about a parishioner that he had helped back in Bedford-Lee. So he's moved to Liverpool, but now he's thinking back. And what he describes of the death of Felix Randall actually took place in Bedford-Lee. In Liverpool, reflecting on it, he writes this masterpiece, absolute masterpiece. Let's just read it and then we'll look through it. Felix Randall the farrier. Oh, is he dead then? My duty all ended, who have watched his mold of man, big-boned and hardy handsome, pining, till time when reason rambled in it, and some fatal four disorders, fleshed there, all contended. Sickness broke him. Impatient he cursed at first, but mended, being anointed and all, though a heavenlier heart began some months earlier, since I had our sweet reprieve and ransom tendered to him. Ah well, God rest him all road ever he offended. This seeing the sick endears them to us. us too it endears. My tongue had taught thee comfort, touch had quenched thy tears that touched my heart, child, Felix, poor Felix Randall. How far from then forethought of all thy more boisterous years, when thou at the random grim forge, powerful among peers, didst fettle for the great grey dray horse his bright and battering sandal. That's it. It's a sonnet. Yeah, that's it. The situation is very clear. Felix Randall was a blacksmith and shoed horses, made horseshoes and shoed horses. Powerful man, big man. When Hopkins met him, 4 diseases contending in him. And at first, he says it, he cursed at first, that shock of learning he was going to die. Not to mention the powerful man being rendered powerless. Someone who had been at the forge his whole life, and strong, and big-boned and hearty, handsome. By the way, notice the alliteration. I should have mentioned it earlier. It's something else he takes from Anglo-Saxon poetry. Endless alliteration. Successive words beginning with the same letter. Very common in Old English poetry. And he's using it constantly. In any case, he wasn't used to it. And so at first, he cursed, but mended being anointed. This, I think, in many ways, the glory of the poem is it's about the sacraments. The Eucharist and last rites. He was impatient, he cursed at first, but mended being anointed. So Hopkins anoints him, and the anger goes out of him. He accepts what has happened to him. It's coming, it's inevitable. Although a heavenlier heart began some months earlier, the change was already beginning in him, since I had our sweet reprieve and ransom tendered to him. Hopkins had brought him the Eucharist, even though he was dying, and the Eucharist began to change him, and I love it, our sweet reprieve and ransom, and began to create in this powerful man a heavenlier heart. And this is a common old expression, God rest him all road ever he offended. God forgive him whatever sins he may have committed in the past. And then he speculates on it to a slightly higher degree. This seeing the sick endears them to us, the pity we feel for the sick. And there is a connection between those of us who are still in health, seeing those who are dying. Us too it endears. It endears, in a sense, them to us, because we're there to help them through this difficult process. And we're realizing, if we're sensible, we're just not there yet, but our time is coming. It's what happens. Death is the end. My tongue had taught thee comfort, touch had quenched thy tears that touched my heart, child. The strong, dying man becomes a child again. He needs taking care of. Poor Felix Randall. And then the last 3 lines are a little curious. How far from then forethought of all thy more boisterous years. When you were young, okay, when thou at the random grim forge, powerful amongst peers, he's at the forge, he's forging horseshoes. And among all of his peers, he's the most powerful man. You weren't thinking then how you would end up. Weak, helpless, dying. Didst fettle for the great grey dray horse his bright and battering sandal. What's he making at the forge? He is making a horseshoe for the great grey dray horse, a specific horse, his bright and battering sandal. Why does the horse need the horseshoe? Because in its day-to-day activity, its hooves will be walking on things and it needs protection. And without that protection that the horseshoe provides, the horse eventually is going to weaken, not be able to move, hurt its feet, no longer be serviceable, And the horseshoe that was created by the blacksmith is bright. He's proud of what he does. He shined it. And battering sandal, it can deal with those heavy roads and keep moving and batter them down, whatever it comes upon. It's a parallel to the Eucharist. What the blacksmith forged at his anvil in order to protect the horse, the priest brings in the Eucharist gives to us in the Eucharist to protect us as we go through life, and particularly to help us make it through the end as we are battered, as death hits us. I find it a remarkable poem. And the last rites, again, being there to protect us at that last moment, being anointed, so that final difficult journey we are able to take. Beautiful, beautiful poem. I find it extraordinary. He was in Liverpool a couple of years and then moved to Glasgow. He didn't find it quite as bad as Liverpool, but again, not. Notice in Liverpool and Glasgow, he was moved away from nature, which was his great love and what sustained him. He not only wrote about nature and observed nature, but he sketched it. He was a very talented artist. He also wrote some music as well. Just an extraordinarily talented young man. But he was removed from nature. He was taken away from nature. One of the things he loved, he had to give up. But he was doing his duty as a priest and still writing poems. And during this period, the poetry is remarkably fine. He didn't worry about the fact that Deutschland had been rejected. His friends didn't care much for his other poems. Occasionally, they would say something nice about a poem or two. He said the following: "The life I lead is subject to many mortifications, but the want of fame as a poet, is the least of them." And he clearly meant it. He didn't care he wasn't famous. "I could wish that my poems could at some time become known, but in some spontaneous way, without my forcing. Well, yes, I wrote them, and I hope maybe someday they'll be out there, but I'm not going to go out and hawk them or try to get them noticed. I wrote them, and maybe someday somebody will care about them." So, yeah, it's remarkable, just remarkable. Let's look at the one on top of the next page. Spring and Fall, to a young child. And this is indeed written to... Nobody knows who the little girl was, but it's autumn, and he saw a little girl who was just feeling very sad, the way everybody feels as the new season sets in and autumn comes on. Spring and Fall, to a young child. Margaret, are you grieving over Golden Grove unleaving? Leaves like the things of man you with your fresh thoughts care for? Can you? Ah, as the heart grows older, it will come to such sights colder by and by, nor spare a sigh, though worlds of wanwood leaf meal lie, and yet you will weep, and know why. Now no matter, child, the name, sorrow's springs are the same, nor mouth had, no nor mind expressed, what heart heard of, ghost guessed. It is the blight man was born for. It is Margaret you mourn for. In some ways, it may be the simplest thing he ever wrote. It's the first one I got to know very well. Extraordinary little poem. Situation. We all felt it, even when we were young in the autumn. Summer's gone, autumn's coming in, a melancholy mood settles in, you're watching the leaves fall, and he sees this little girl and she's grieving. I love it, grieving. He makes up the name Golden Grove. What does it mean? That beautiful world of nature out there, and the leaves, even the beautiful leaves of autumn are falling off the trees. So the Golden Grove is losing its leaf. I love the word, unleaving, okay? Leaves falling off the tree. It's also clearly a reference to Eden. There was once a golden grove. And as we went from innocence and fell, hence the fall, we lost Golden Grove. Adam and Eve had to leave paradise. So it's part of the human condition. Leaves, like the things of man, you with your fresh thoughts care for, can you? You can actually feel so sad watching those leaves fall. I love the rhyme, man, you, can, you. It's an ingenious little rhyme, which you don't even really notice. But it's, she has fresh thoughts. They're the thoughts of a child. Ah, as the heart grows older, it will come to such sights colder. You're going to see much harder, more difficult things than leaves falling off the trees. It will come to such sights colder by and by, nor spare a sigh. Your heart will grow colder. You won't be moved by things that are much worse than the leaves falling. Though worlds of wan wood leaf meal lie, though all the trees lose all their leaves and they become pale and are just lying on the ground, you will not be moved any longer. It's that loss, again, of natural reactions of childhood as we toughen up as we get older. And yet, you will weep and know why. You're still going to be crying, but you're going to be crying over very specific things that happen to you. Not just a general feeling of autumn coming on and leaves falling. Now, no matter, child, the name. Don't worry, we don't have to call it anything. Sorrow's springs are the same. The source of sorrow in us is always one thing. Nor mouth had, no nor mind expressed, what heart heard of, ghost guessed. What he's talking about is the spring of sorrow that's in us, even though we can't say exactly what it is, the mind can't fully understand exactly what it is, the heart feels it, it just vaguely, and the spirit, ghost in the sense of spirit, and the spirit in each of us might try to guess, why am I so depressed? Why do I feel so sad? I can't name it, I'm not sure what it is, okay? It is the blight man was born for. Its original sin. We're back to the garden. The fall of Adam and Eve touched us all. Original sin was passed down. It is the blight man was born for. If we're born into this world, then we're born with original sin. It is Margaret that you mourn for. It's something in you that's causing the sorrow. Oh, I love this poem. Just love this poem. Gentle, understanding, honest, direct. Margaret, are you grieving over Golden Grove on leaving? Leaves like the things of man, you with your fresh thoughts care for, can you? Ah, as the heart grows older, it will come to such sights colder by and by, nor spare a sigh, though worlds of wan wood leaf meal lie. And yet you will weep, and know why. Now no matter, child, the name, sorrow's springs are the same. Nor mouth had, no nor mind expressed, what heart heard of, ghost guessed. It is the blight man was born for. It is Margaret you mourn for. Love it. Just love it. There was a great Irish poet living very young at the time Hopkins was writing, William Butler Yeats. They met at a social engagement one night and didn't talk to each other, two of the greatest poets of the time. Although Hopkins did say afterwards he sensed something in that man. There is a very short poem by Yeats that's similar called To a Child Dancing in the Wind. It's addressed to a little girl as well. Different story. Yeats is walking along the seashore and sees a little girl. It's a very windy day, and he sees a little girl dancing on the seashore in the midst of the wind. And then there's a ribbon around her hair. She unties the ribbon, and the hair falls about her, and she keeps dancing. And Yeats looks at her, and the poem is this: To a child dancing in the wind. Dance there upon the shore. What cause have you to care for wind and water's roar? And tumble out your hair that the salt drops have wet. Being young, you have not known the fool's triumph, nor love lost as soon as won, nor the best laborer dead, and all the sheaves to bind. What need you dread the monstrous crying of wind? There it's annoyance on the part of the man looking at the child who's carefree, innocent, young, dancing, and the older man is resentful. Have a good time. You can have a good time because you don't know what's in store for you, what's going to happen. There's a bitterness in the poet that's hard, that's sad. Here, there's a difference between the Catholic poet viewing a child and poor Yeats, who believed in very little except some goofy theories of his own, looking at the child. They're both good poems. This is a greater poem because of the beautiful charity in it. Now I'm going to tell you a story. Your Excellency, could you hand me the water? I'm getting a little dry here. As I said, the first time I came upon Hopkins was an undergraduate in a lit survey course, taught by a lapsed Catholic. The second time was 1985. When I began teaching at the Naval Academy, across the hall from me was a very sweet Jewish young woman who had given up the Jewish faith. She taught Romantic poetry and the Victorians, and she loved Hopkins. She loved Hopkins, and she would teach Hopkins a lot. I knew this, but I still didn't really know Hopkins. She came into my office one morning and said, I haven't slept for the last 3-4 nights. I've got this pain in my stomach. And the little voice in my head that I now listen to all the time, unless it's saying things that are coming from a different place, the little voice in my head said, and I said, Nancy, you've got to get to the doctor at once. She went to the doctor, diagnosed within hours with ovarian cancer, and told she had a very short time to live. She agreed to chemotherapy, and she had 2 surgeries. The chemotherapy, if you haven't seen anybody go through it, is a terrible process, a very terrible process. Her uncle was a noted cancer surgeon in Chicago. He performed surgery on her twice, and before she died, he admitted to her it was an experiment on his part. He knew she was going to die anyway, but had a couple of experiments he wanted to run, and ran them on his own niece. She was engaged to be married to a professor of English, a little bit older, at the University of Pennsylvania. She was probably early 30s, and he, I would guess, in his mid-40s, and they were very happy. He was Anglican, but had the faith, and a good man, a decent man. She became weaker and weaker, and while I was home over the summer, the last time I called her, she couldn't even speak. She was in such pain. And she died during the summer while I was gone. When I returned to the academy in the fall, I got a call from Robert, the fiancé, who said, Nancy's mother has asked if I will empty the apartment and drive all her things back up to Philadelphia because her mother can't face any of it. I said, of course I do. He said, would you help me? Got furniture to load and a lot of things to load. I said, gladly. He said, well, I've rented a truck. I'll be there tomorrow morning at about 8 o'clock. So he picked me up at my apartment, and we drove over to Nancy's apartment, and we went inside, and he brought with him a big bottle of gin, because it was going to be terribly trying for both of us. So we would load some furniture and then sit down and take a swig and take a deep breath, and then we'd load some more furniture or take our clothes out and box them up and get, until finally we had emptied the apartment except for 2 folding chairs and a little bit of gin in the bottom of the bottle. And we sat down on the folding chairs and poured the rest of the gin in 2 little paper cups. And I said, well, when I first met Nancy, I never dreamt it would end this way and this quickly. And he said, well, yes. He said, but at least it has a happy ending. And I said, a happy ending? He said, don't you know? I said, what? He said, an hour before she died, I was in the hospital sitting with her. And she looked at me and she said, and she had been to services with him. She said, Robert, there's much about the Christian faith I don't understand yet, but I understand the sufferings of Christ. I want to be baptized. He ran around the hospital, couldn't find a priest, couldn't find a minister, couldn't find anyone. She was sinking quickly, and that's why God has allowed anyone to baptize in an emergency. He baptized his fiancée minutes before she died. I mean, what can you say? God is good. They had a memorial service at the academy. Her mother asked me if I would read some Hopkins. And I didn't really know Hopkins. And I said, well, yeah, of course, anything you want, Mrs. Wicker, I'll be happy to do it. And she gave me Nancy's book of Hopkins poems. I'm going through it, trying to figure out what do I read? What do I do? Came upon a poem and thought, oh, this is what I'll read. It's not on the sheet. It's not as long as the Deutschland, not even close, I promise you. So don't rush screaming from the room. Hopkins started a play, but didn't finish it. He wasn't really a dramatist. It was called St. Winifred's Well. He remembered it from a well where St. Winifred in Wales was honored and miracles had occurred. Well, it didn't get far, but he finished the opening scene, and he finished this chorus. It's a poetic chorus for the maidens who come to St. Winifred's Well to honor St. Winifred. And as they sing her praises, they do it in terms of what has been lost when she was murdered. It's called The Leaden Echo and the Golden Echo. The leaden echo is first. You'll know immediately when when it switches to the golden echo. How to keep? Is there any? Is there none such? Nowhere known some bow or brooch or braid or brace, lace, latch or catch or key to keep back beauty. Keep it. Beauty, beauty, beauty from vanishing away. Oh, is there no frowning of these wrinkles, ranked wrinkles deep down? No waving off of those most mournful messengers, still messengers, sad and stealing messengers of gray? No, there's none. There's none. Oh, no, there's none. Nor can you long be what you now are, called fair. Do what you may do, do what you may, and wisdom is early to despair. Be beginning, since nothing can be done, to keep at bay age and age's evils, hoar hair, ruck and wrinkle, drooping, dying, death's worst, winding sheets, tombs and worms and tumbling to decay. So be beginning to despair. Oh, there's none. No, there's none. Be beginning to despair, despair, despair. Spare. There is one. Yes, I have one. Hush there. Only not within seeing of the sun, not within the singeing of the strong sun, tall sun's tinging, or treacherous the tainting of the earth's air. Somewhere elsewhere there is, where? One. Yes, I can tell such a key. I do know such a place, where whatever's prized and passes of us, everything that's fresh and fast flying of us, seems to us sweet of us and swiftly away with, done away with, undone, done with, soon done with, and yet dear and dangerously sweet of us, the wimpled water dimpled not by morning matched face, the flower of beauty, fleece of beauty, too apt to fleet, never fleets more, fastened with the tenderest truth to its own best being and its loveliness of youth. It is an everlastingness of, it is an all youth. Come then, your ways and airs and looks, locks, maiden gear, gallantry and gaiety and grace, winning ways, airs innocent, maiden manners, sweet looks, loose locks, long locks, love locks, gay gear, going gallant, girl grace, resign them, sign them, seal them, send them, motion them with breath, and with sighs, soaring sighs, deliver them, beauty and the ghost, deliver it, early now, long before death, give beauty back, beauty, back to God, beauty's self, and beauty's giver. See, not a hair is, not an eyelash, not the least lash lost. Every hair is hair of the head, numbered. Nay, what we had light-handed left in surly, the mere mould will have waked and have waxed and have walked with the wind, what while we slept. This side, that side hurling a heavy-headed hundredfold, while we slumbered. Oh, then, weary then, why should we tread? Oh, why are we so haggard at the heart, so care-coiled, care-killed, so fagged, so fashed, so cogged, so cumbered, when the thing was freely forfeit, is kept with fonder a care kept than we could have kept it, kept far with fonder a care, and we should have lost it. Finer, fonder a care kept. Where kept? Do but tell us where kept. Where? Yonder. What high is that? We follow. Now we follow. Yonder. Yes, yonder. 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 It's just a beautiful poem. Oh, my. Afterwards, her mother came up and said to me, that was one of Nancy's favorites. I said, I didn't know that. She knew Hopkins. Hopkins, I suspect, played a big role in her request at the end. It's all very mysterious. Very, very, very mysterious. And then things plummeted, really plummeted. He was sent to Dublin. Newman had started University College in Dublin, so there would be somewhere for young Catholics to be educated other than Trinity College there. And it was basically two old houses side by side in Dublin, in terrible disrepair. They could never get the money from the local bishops to upgrade the house, and it was filled with dry rot, leaky plumbing, polluted drains, and the drains were filled with rats. It was apparently a horrible place. Although the biggest rat would come after Hopkins died. Hopkins' room where he lived became a classroom where a big Irish rat named James Joyce studied. It was located right on St. Stephen's Green, but the problem was even the city was filthy and awful compared to what he had found in Liverpool. Incredible poverty. The River Liffey, basically an open sewer. And he was there and assigned to teach young Catholic men Greek and Latin and grade their examinations. And as he said, writing to his friend Bridges, he was stunned at how little they knew. But the exams would come flooding into him from other teachers as well, and there were times he would have piles of 500 Latin and Greek exam books that he had to grade. And there's a description of him sitting, very ill, with a wet rag wrapped around his head, weeping as he tried to grade these miserable exams. It was a horrible situation. But there he was, and of course totally cut off from nature. At that point he had no connection with nature at all. And this is where he would spend the last years of his life, 1884 to 1889, the last 5 years of his life under these conditions. It's not surprising that the terrible sonnets were written under these conditions, the sonnets of desolation. But only part of it was from the conditions in which he found himself. It really was a spiritual dark night of the soul, where he was being tested and being challenged and holding onto his faith in the midst of terrible conditions, desolation, pleading with God for some direction, some purpose, some aid, and nothing coming. Let me just I'll read you a couple of them. There are only 6 of them, and they move in a kind of sequence. This is the first of them, and I think it gives a clue as to what was happening. It begins with called "To Seem the Stranger," and he's talking about being removed moment by moment from everything he treasured in life. First, the separation from his family. Then having to leave England. He was devoted to England. As you noticed at the end of the Deutschland, he asked that nun to pray for England, that England may finally return to the faith. Still waiting, but all things are possible. All things are possible. And then here, finally, being in Ireland and having his own faith challenged. This is the first of the 6. To seem the stranger lies my lot, my life among strangers. Father and mother dear, brothers and sisters are in Christ not near, and he, my peace, my parting, sword and strife. England, whose honor, all my heart woos, wife to my creating thought, would neither hear me where I plead nor do I weary of idle a being, but where wars are rife. I am in Ireland now I am at a 3rd remove. Not but in all removes I can kind love both give and get. Only what word, wisest my heart, breeds dark heaven's baffling ban, bars, or hell's spell thwarts? This to hoard unheard, heard unheeded, leaves me a lonely began. He uses began as a noun. Where do I start from now? How do I begin to go on? Number 2, and then number 3 is here. Number 2, I wake and feel the fell of dark, not day. What hours, oh what black hours we have spent this night. What sights you, heart, saw, ways you went. And more must in yet longer lights delay. With witness I speak this, but where I say hours I mean years, mean life, and my lament is cries countless, cries like dead letters sent to dearest him that lives, alas, away. I am gall, I am heartburn, God's most deep decree bitter would have me taste. My taste was me, bones built in me, flesh filled, blood brimmed the curse. Self-yeast of spirit a dull dough sours. I see the lost are like this, and their scourge to be as I am mine, their sweating selves, but worse. If you want to look, here's number 3, begins, no worst there is none. No worst there is none. Pitched past pitch of grief, more pangs will, schooled at 4 pangs, wilder ring. Comforter, where? Where is your comforting? Mary, mother of us, where is your relief? My cries heave, herds long, huddle in amain, a chief woe, world sorrow, on an age-old anvil wince and sing, then lull, then leave off. Fury had shrieked, no lingering, let me be fell, force I must be brief. Oh, the mind has mountains, cliffs of fall frightful, sheer, no man fathomed. Hold them cheap may who ne'er hung there, nor does long our small durance deal with that steep or deep. Here, creep, wretch, under a comfort serves in a whirlwind. All life death does end, and each day dies with sleep. Ooh. By the way, the images there of hanging on the mountains, he takes words from Act 4 of King Lear, where Edgar is leading his blinded father Gloucester, and Gloucester wants to commit suicide and wants to throw himself off the cliffs of Dover and kill himself. And since he's blind, Edgar, who's pretending to be a peasant, Gloucester doesn't know it's his own son, takes him to the edge of the cliff and then describes what he sees there, the mountain going sheer down. And he takes some of it, the frightful sheer, no man fathomed. But of course, Gloucester doesn't die. His son tricks him, sets him on firm ground and tells him to throw himself off, and Gloucester just throws himself flat down on the ground and knocks himself out. And then Edgar, after his father wakes up, says, oh, he pretends to be somebody else. Oh, you fell so far. An egg having fallen would have shattered, but you survived. Thy life's a miracle. And there's a hint of that here. He won't give up, but at least there's what? I know death will end this misery, and I know that at least at the end of the day, sleep will come, even though it's the mind keeps going and he cannot allow himself to sleep. Here's number 4. I'll not carry in comfort despair, not feast on thee, not untwist, slack they may be, these last strands of man in me, or most weary, cry, I can no more. I can something, hope, wish day come, not choose not to be. But oh, thou terrible, why wouldst thou rude on me, thy ring earth, right foot rock, lay a lion limb against me, scan with darksome devouring eyes my bruised bones, and fan, in terms of tempest, me heaped there, me frantic to avoid thee and flee. Why? That my chaff might fly, my grain lie sheer and clear. Nay, in all that toil, that coil, since seems I kiss the rod, hand rather, my heart low-lapped strength stole joy, would laugh, cheer. Cheer whom, though? The hero whose heaven-handling flung me, foot trod me, or me that fought him? Oh, which one? Is it each one? That night, that year of now done darkness, I, wretch, lay wrestling with my God. My God. Looking back to his earlier fight, trying to not come into the faith, wrestling with God, and realizing then what happened to him, cleared things, and has to assume it's happening again now. In the whirlwind, his chaff is being blown away, and what's left of him will rest real on the floor according to God's will. So notice, it's not despair. He does not fall into despair, as wretched as things are. Number 5, patience. And the last two begin, you get a sense, he's beginning to work his way out of it. Patience, hard thing. The hard thing but to pray. But bid for, patience is. Patience, who asks, wants war, wants wounds, weary his times, his tasks, to do without, take tosses, and obey. Rare patience roots in these, and these away, nowhere. Natural heart's ivy patience masks our ruins of wrecked past purpose. There she basks purple eyes and seas of liquid leaves all day. We hear our hearts grate on themselves. It kills to bruise them dearer. Yet the rebellious wills of us we do bid God bend to him even so. And where is he who more and more distills delicious kindness? He is patient. Patience fills his crisp combs, and that comes those ways we know. God is there. God is patient. He must be patient. He believes it will end. So there's still the sense God is watching over him. God somehow is doing this to him, and he must wait. I'll do this, and then we can take another little break. So the nuns at the Catholic school are going to have a little party for the children. And they don't have a lot of money, so they just buy enough for each of the children. And they buy some apples, and they make some little sandwiches, and they buy some cookies, and they put them on a table, and then the children come in. But one of the nuns puts a sign at the front of the table, right in front of the apples, saying, "Only take one. God is watching." So the children are very careful, and they take one apple and take a sandwich. They get down to the end, and Johnny turns to his friend when they come to the cookies and says, "Take as many as you want. God is watching the apples." So, well, let's do the last of them. I have a little bit of time. Let's do the last of them. This is, oh boy, again, it's you understand what's the last one. My own heart, it begins. My own heart let me more have pity on. Let me live to my sad self hereafter kind, charitable, not live this tormented mind with this tormented mind tormenting yet. I cast for comfort I can no more get by groping round my comfortless, than blind eyes in their dark can day, or thirst can find thirst all in a world of wet. Soul, self, come poor Jack self, I do advise you jaded let be. Call off thoughts a while elsewhere, leave comfort root room, let joy sighs at God knows when to God knows what, whose smiles not wrung, see you, unforeseen times rather, as skies between pie mountains, lights a lovely mile. Those last two lines are strange. God is there. God will once again, at some time, bring him joy. In some way, bring him joy. You can't, as he says, wring out of God a smile, because it will happen at an unforeseen time, just as skies, and he makes this verb, between pie, means to come between things like the slice of a pie. It's the most curious verb ever created. So all of a sudden, as you're looking up at the mountains, skies will, between pie and the mountains, suddenly light a beautiful light smile, and that will be God smiling down. But we don't know when it will happen. We don't know how it will happen. But the light's going to come again between those two mountains, and it takes us back to those cliffs that he was hanging on in the darker earlier sonnet. It's a place of rest, and somehow he has worked himself through it poetically. come back, when we come back, I'll just talk about his end and read one more poem and then do one other little thing just because I want to. Thank you, thank you, thank you.